Mr. Speaker, much would have been said about this budget from the government's side. And I have no doubt in my mind that what is similar to the 2019 budget and the 2015 budget is that they were both billion-dollar budgets. I want, Mr. Speaker, the Vincentian people to take themselves back to the suffering and the pain that they would have had to endure in 2013, 14, and here comes 2015 with $1 billion worth of promises to make their lives better. Mr. Speaker, we can probably look back and find 1 billion reasons as to why the Vincentian people, by and large, are still impoverished. Much has been promised, but very little would have been delivered. The lives of the people did not change for the better, Mr. Speaker. It actually changed for the worse. 2015 was the year when we had election. And undoubtedly, Mr. Speaker, presenting a $1 billion budget at that time, the only objective could have been to create the impression in the minds of the people that they can expect a lot for the years following if they were to return the Unity Labour Party government into office. We know what happened, Mr. Speaker. Be it a stroke of luck or some undertow, some undercurrent, some maneuver, the ULP is in government again. But for the years 2016, 17, 18, life continued. It was business as usual, ULP style, Mr. Speaker. People continued to be wondering. And I know a lot of people talk about, the beauty of constituencies and so on, but all I have to say about my constituency, and I continue to say it, Mr. Speaker, we are the most wonderful people in all of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and why is this so? We are wonderful in the sense, Mr. Speaker, that people are always wondering, where am I going to get the next dollar to feed my children? Where am I going to get money to pay my light bill? To pay water? To send my children to school? To buy food? Mr. Speaker. And I consider also, Mr. Speaker, those persons, the very young people who have young families, who have been trying their best to find a place to call home, a structure to call home, how difficult it would have been for them, Mr. Speaker. And a lot has been promised and very little would have been delivered. So their lives did not change, Mr. Speaker. Here we are again in 2019, and the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines are being presented with another $1 billion budget. So do we find, Mr. Speaker, 1 billion ways to be optimistic? I do not think so. There will be more of the same. More hardship, more suffering, more pain, the quality of life of the Vincentian people, listening to that budget that was presented to us, offers precious little to improve their standard of living. Mr. Speaker, we are already a country that is burdened, saddled by taxes. And to come to the Parliament with a budget that proposes to impose a single dollar of extra tax on the Vincentian people is nothing short of wicked, heartless, and it is indeed unthinkable. But of course, it is the Unity Labour Party administration that we are talking about. And the Labour love that they have offered St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We love you, and we want you to feel the pressure a little bit longer. Mr. Speaker, you look at taxes. Taxes, Mr. Speaker, as far as they were said to us, is a unnecessary or a necessary evil. But really and truly, I do not see the necessity for us to burden our people who have been limping along, barely surviving. They have been surviving on the generosity of their neighbors, their families, and those persons in the diaspora. And rather than coming with creative ways of raising revenue to make the lives of our people better, we are making it worse by taxing them. Mr. Speaker, our country can do better. And the New Democratic Party is proposing to the Vincentian people that given the opportunity to govern the affairs of this country, we will do a lot better from day one. Mr. Speaker, I want to spend a considerable amount of time in my constituency. But I want to draw reference, Mr. Speaker, that will be for the next time I present in this House. I'll get an hour and 15 minutes. Yeah, because there was a work, the undertow was operating under the electoral process. Yes. Mr. Speaker, I just want to draw reference to a statement that was made by the Honorable Minister of Housing. And Mr. Minister, I want to lend support. I want to agree with the fact that we really shouldn't have structures built haphazardly, just springing up all over the place. And I want to agree also, Mr. Speaker, that the Physical Planning Board should enforce the laws of this country. But, Mr. Speaker, I have in my hand here, in my possession, and it is not a document that I necessarily want to make. I don't want to make it a document of the House. But I just want to just make some references to a situation in 2010.
So if you're gonna report,
I'm sorry?
or tell us what it is at a minimum.
Well, it is an enforcement order.
Wow.
It's my document. But it is important that the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines understand that whenever, I don't make up things, I leave that to you. You're the granddaddy of that. But, Mr. Speaker, we have a situation in 2010 where a constituent of mine, this is not squatting, but this is a situation where a structure is actually built. Someone is encroaching on somebody else's property, building a structure. The members of the Physical Planning Board would have paid them a visit, recognize what is happening, and give them an ultimatum to leave. 2010. This is 2019. Absolutely nothing was done. And I'm wondering whether or not it is a situation as we read in George Orwell's book, Animal Farm. All animals are equal. That is the one that is most applicable to you. But some animals are more equal than others. The point I am simply making here, Mr. Speaker, is that a situation where people, because they support the Unity Labour Party, they can do as they wish. They can ignore the Physical Planning Board. And Mr. Minister, I will draw that to your attention. I will draw it to your attention. But I'm also serving you notice that until something is done in this case, any structure in my constituency that is demolished or want to be demolished by the powers that be will be met with stiff resistance until the law is enforced on this particular property and these people. Mr. Speaker, I want to turn my attention to my constituency. We have heard from the presentation of the Minister of Finance, Mr. Speaker. And over the years, we have heard a lot about climate change. And it is something that is affecting us in the Caribbean and here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. But we have heard so much about climate change without ever hearing what really is climate. So for us to have an appreciation of the change in climate, it is for us to know precisely what the climate is. Mr. Speaker, climate, simply put, is a state of the atmosphere, the condition of the atmosphere over a long period of time. And sometimes we present this case where we have a phenomena taking place. And we wonder whether or not it can be categorized as climate change. I am not denying climate change. I am saying that it is evident that there are changes in the climate. But what you ought to say before you talk about climate change, say what the climate is. So, Mr. Speaker, a lot of people, many times we confuse the climate with the weather. Yes, we do. But that being said, it is difficult to separate one from the other. And I give you a very simple example, Mr. Speaker. There are... You have to watch BBC to understand what is happening. This is something that is second nature to me. And I like what the Minister of Agriculture said. He didn't have to go home and study this thing. This is a part of me, naturally. Mr. Speaker, if we were to talk or visit, in its widest form, we can actually talk, draw reference to the United States of America, for example. Mr. Speaker, those countries, we have a better appreciation of what climate change is. Because in areas such as Illinois, Missouri, Kansas, and Colorado, the heartland states, Mr. Speaker, because of their distance away from the sea, and one of the main things that influence the climate is what is called latitude or distance from the sea. So they will experience what is called extremes of climate, and I'm only saying this to bring us back to the Caribbean situation. In winter, it is extremely cold. and then in summer it is extremely hot. That is to say, Mr. Speaker, there are extremes of climate, and that is why I gave the definition before. It is a state of the atmosphere over a long period of time. Now, Mr. Speaker, if you want to look at places now on the western side and on the eastern seaboard, you will notice that those states do not have extremes of climate because they have the cooling influence of the sea in summer. In winter, they have the cooling influence of the sea, and in summer, they have the warming influence of the sea. That is why I am not talking about El Nino and La Nina. I am not talking about that. But, Mr. Speaker, it is something that you need to sit down and learn. Mr. Speaker, we can identify the changes in the climate in those territories easily. But for us in the Caribbean, because of our latitudinal position, we do not see that. What really affects us here, Mr. Speaker, is changes in the temperature, not in terms of its coolness, but how high the temperature goes, how hot it becomes. And also, Mr. Speaker, we're talking about precipitation or rainfall. That is what concerns us most in the Caribbean and in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Mr. Speaker, the precipitation that we're talking about here affects us because of the intensity and the duration. That is why, Mr. Speaker, it is incumbent on all of us to do what we can to mitigate the effects that will follow or that will transpire from rainfall intensity and the duration. And whenever we have long periods of rain, Mr. Speaker, and especially if it is of high intensity, that is to say, heavy and continuous showers, because we are a mountainous terrain, Mr. Speaker, we become prone to flooding. Mr. Speaker, I say all of this to bring us straight into the Buckerman River, and yes, you must know that is where I am going, because every single year that I have been in the Parliament, I have been talking about those rivers, the Buckerman River and the York River. But it is a laugh to you. Why? You don't care. The 2013 flood, Mr. Speaker, we all recognize what happened on Christmas Eve Day. The rainfall was extensive. It was heavy and it was continuous. It doesn't matter whether it was in the night or in the day. The sum total of this, Mr. Speaker, is the fact that the river, every possible stream or water course in St. Vincent and the Grenadines became an enormous flood, an enormous torrent, Mr. Speaker. And we saw that they affected a lot of erosion. Areas of rivers that we thought could never have been eroded, they were eroded. Obstacles in the river, Mr. Speaker, and we know that the obstacles, the stones, which are deeply embedded in the floor of the river or the sides, is really to overcome friction. They actually slow down the river. But from our experiences of 2013 flood, those were not even embedded deeply enough to prevent the river from eroding them and making their own path down to the Buckerman Valley. Mr. Speaker, many people suffered loss from that flood. The river overflowed its banks, and accounts are given of how or what people had to do to escape. We noticed in the area of retreat in Vermont, 3 wall structures were washed away. There's not even evidence that those structures existed. Mr. Speaker, the banks of those rivers that we thought were high enough, and in the natural levees that were formed over the years to contain the river, they were all gone. The roads, Mr. Speaker, were also drastically eroded. Somebody that I knew as a child, I used to have fun going down to the river and see these guys dam the river and catch all sorts of crayfish and so on. He lost his life, not that he was in the river, he was on the road. That river encroached, took him, string him up on a tree. A child, Mr. Speaker, in Cane Grove, well, two of them for that matter, a toddler and a student of the the community college, they lost their lives down there. And lower down that river, Mr. Speaker, a young lady that I know from Rolling Hill also lost her life. These are things that happen because of climate change, Mr. Speaker. These are things that occur and should cause us to have a heart, a human heart, to be more considerate rather than coming to the Parliament whenever I raise a subject to make it a laughing matter. It's, simply put, Mr. Speaker, this is a situation where human lives do not matter to this administration. They don't, simply don't. I'm stretching it. It is clearly demonstrated for all to see. Mr. Speaker, I have been calling, because we do not know. I remember making a presentation in this house. That is before the 2013 flood, And there was a warning, and the Minister of Transport agreed with me. I said the Buckerment River is a monster. The Minister agreed. And that was prior to the 2013 flood. Our worst fears, Mr. Speaker, came to pass. And rather than doing all that we can, because we're talking so much about climate change and the evidences that are before us, and the fact that we are likely to have more heavy rainfall, the possibility of even greater flooding, and we're doing absolutely nothing to contain the river so that we will not have a repeat of what occurred in 2013. Every year, a budget is presented, and a allocation is made for river defense in the Buckerment River. Every year, promises, 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 and nothing, save and except for a situation where somebody had a bright idea and thought, whatever stone that is left in the bed of the river, to create friction and slow down the river in the case that there's another flood, to take a heavy equipment, a heavy machinery, take them out and haphazardly pile them up on the side of the river and saying that that is river defense. Just a couple of months after that, Mr. Speaker, the river came down again and removed them. When will serious thought be given to the fact that the Buckerment River needs serious attention? Mr. Speaker, I know, and I agree with you over there, although you're presenting the budget as if you have unlimited resources. We know that is not the case. We know St. Vincent and the Grenadines is a poor country, and we have certain constraints, financial constraints. But it is, Mr. Speaker, a situation where we must have choice. We have to make choice when we are faced with scarce resources. And in looking at these choices, Mr. Speaker, we must allocate scarce resources in a way that the economists would say, the age-old principle of maximization of satisfaction. Can we say at all that anything has been done to satisfy the people of the Buckerment River from Vermont down to Buckerment Bay? Promises. Mr. Speaker, look at the roads in Vermont. For anybody who just heard about the flooding that occurred there and hear people talk about how much the infrastructure, the road network was eroded and scarred, hearing it is one thing. But if they want to go there today, go there tomorrow, their experience would be as if the flood occurred yesterday, because absolutely nothing was done to restore those roads. Why is this government continuously trampling on the people of the Buckerman Valley? Why are they taking them for granted? But I know. And it is time for the people of Vermont in particular to understand that this is a government that serves no interest but that of their own. Mr. Speaker, this is a matter that I will come back to. But I asked a question last week about that same river. I understand, Mr. Minister, you're asking me if I saw what's in the estimate. Yes, I saw what's in the estimate. But I'm fed up of the promises. You're still going to talk about design. How long are you going to take to design something to contain the river?
I remember you have 15 minutes.
Mr. Speaker. Yeah, I think so too. But, Mr. Speaker, seriously.
He started at 6:03.
Why do we have a situation where the minister, we're looking at a river that is so dangerous? Are you telling me that you plan to do work in the last quarter of the year, in the rainy season? Who can take you seriously? Camden Park, Mr. Speaker, the York River. We have two rivers flowing there, one flowing under the bridge, a sweet spot. And you will remember the name David Brown, I hope you do. That's where they're living. That river is encroaching on their boundary. That is the York River, but there's also another one, Mr. Speaker, that one exit down at Flower Mill. And there's another one in the heart of Camden Park, running down where Julian is building blocks down there. Not this Julian. But, Mr. Speaker, that two rivers, but essentially it is one river. It is just that one is a tributary with Deford Junction. That is to say that it has difficulty joining the main river because of its confluence. But, Mr. Speaker, whenever it rains, although the river in Camden Park seems unassuming, in the dry season, it is almost just about ankle height, and you can walk in there, like Peter. But in the rainy season, Mr. Speaker, this is a seriously dangerous river. Looking at the river that flows down past David Brown's residence there, going across by DJ Bugner, it is encroaching on his property. And I'm so fearful, Mr. Speaker, because lower downstream in the vicinity of Minerva Delplesh, there is what you call a concave bank, a meander. That is exactly where the river bends and it is hitting the bank. That is where it is affecting erosion. That bank has been undercut, Mr. Speaker. And it is a good thing that the NDP and Jerry Scott had the vision to try to construct a retaining wall there. But the wall has been undercut. The constant erosion of the river creates a crack. And I'm fearful, Mr. Speaker, that if we were to have a severe flood again, that not only will Minerva's property be in jeopardy, but all the residents in that vicinity going down to the Bureau of Standards, they will be in utter danger. And I'm appealing to this government again, Mr. Speaker, to do something to contain the river. On the other side, people like Jazzy, Aldane, Norcy, Lappy, the Pompeys, Chloe, Amrel, Josette, Susie, all these people are in the line of fire, Mr. Speaker. And in that river, a child encroached close to the bank. Up to today, and it was not even the 2013 flood, they cannot find a child. That child was washed away. I came to this house here, and whatever I proposed and asked for was trivialized, scoffed at, because the people of Camden Park don't mean anything to this administration, nor does the life of that little child. Mr. Speaker, I move on, because I recognize that time is really, really flying. There are so many roads in my constituency, Mr. Speaker, that need attention. I came to the Parliament and I asked about a bridge in Cocoa. Cocoa is that part of Camden Park there from the bus stop close to the clinic going over to the other side of Camden Park plan. Whenever it rains, Mr. Speaker, there's so many people who use that road, jumping river, jumping stones to cross. But they cannot whenever it rains. And it is really heartless to have those people who live just across the riverbank there into the area of West Kingston to walk up to the bridge at Street Spot or down to the forestry department over there, where they could just have a footpath or a little river crossing. How long would I be coming to the Parliament to ask for that? Look at the Bullamy Road, Mr. Speaker, close to where Jerry Scott lives. I don't know if it's because Jerry Scott lives there, where this road is neglected. He started that. And you know, there is a striking similarity between this government and when you study the field of archaeology. Because the relic of the New Democratic Party is so evident with respect to roads. You know precisely when the New Democratic Party left office. Because all the roads that they were doing, they stand still until today. Absolutely nothing was done. How long? How much material would it take to fix that road from Bullamy that exits at the Bureau of Standards? How long would it take? Mr. Speaker, the road, the factory road in Camden Park, a youngster lost his life. He fell off from his motorcycle a few months ago. And the principal from Bottomtown, yes, and Camden Park as well, Rocher Bay. He fell off his bike because that bike went into a pothole. And we don't have any sympathy. We don't want to stop another tragedy from occurring. We go down further, Mr. Speaker, right in the corner, we're going to the container port in Camden Park. Going down to Juicy, it is ridiculous. There's a hole across the brewery. Well, I don't know if you ever visit a karst landscape, a limestone region. We no longer have potholes in them, Mr. Speaker. We have sinkholes, dolines, uvalas. They're so huge, they are craters. What is this government doing about it? Promising? I heard the Minister of Transport and Works talking about, you know, all the roads that were used when the South Leeward Highway was being constructed. They would be fixed, yes. We've had opening of that road for the longest while. We also have had renaming of the road. But all the roads that were used and destroyed because of the heavy traffic, they're still the same, except they're worse now. And we were told that the government has, from that South Leeward Highway project, $8 million left over. Where is the $8 million? I come to the Parliament last week, ask a question about it, and I'm told that you have to wait on the approval of the CDB to get that $8 million that you said you had already. I don't care what is in the estimate. Show me the money. You said you have the money and no work is done. Spring Road, Mr. Speaker, in Kittels. In Spring Road, I do not understand, Mr. Speaker. Boy, I don't know the Honorable Senator Charles, your church, oh my Lord. Your church road, Spring Road. I came to the Parliament, asked a question about that. You know what the minister said? He said, Mr. Speaker, I suspect this is the road where the Honourable Minister, Honourable Member for South Leeward live. Well, no, you got that wrong. I don't live there. So because it's suspected that I was living there, absolutely nothing was done. And it is getting worse. The only reason why I think those Adventist people could really tolerate that is because if Christ were to come and they're in the road, they're standing on holy ground. Mr. Speaker, Coconut Range. Coconut Range, Mr. Speaker. We have a road for more than a year. The road is no longer motorable. Just above the multipurpose of the Tech Vac in Camden Park there, going up to the tunnel in Coconut Range. That road collapsed, Mr. Speaker, more than a year. And it is the same way up to now. Up to now. All the promises that were made. Or you're going to have a little more inconvenience. How long will the people of Camden Park be inconvenienced? Mr. Speaker, I'm going to have to hit and run now. In Clare Valley. I got to Clare Valley, Mr. Speaker. And you look at that road. You're looking at the San Andreas fault. Every patch of road, except for the piece where Morris Slater, the late Morris Slater's residence is. Everywhere is filled with fault lines. In Clare Valley. I came to the Parliament and I asked of the Minister of Works to please build a footpath for those persons on the hillside of Plan in Clare Valley. You know, people have to, I went there, physically went there and witnessed people walking down on all fours. But the ministers did not see that as being important. He said there are more roads which are more important than that. All right, there you go. In Bedrock, same problem. People have to walk on all fours, walk on the buttocks whenever it rains. Mr. Speaker, Big Bush in Willan, problem, as if nobody lives there. In the vicinity of the Catholic Church, in the close to the residents, well, going up to the residents of Kenton Chance and others. That road needs to be paved. Nothing. In Carco, in Chauncey, and in Merricky, unfinished roads. The road opposite the ULP office in Chauncey. You don't want to see the number of potholes. And that is where your office is, and you can't look. Well, I think charity begins at home. Well, if you can't look after that road, I don't know which road you're going to look after. Mr. Speaker, Riverdale in Pembroke, every budget I am coming and tackling this road. And we're hearing the same response. The people should have ensure that whoever they buy the land from, put in the roads. Well, they're paying tax. They are paying tax, they are contributing to the tax base. But some people just have to learn the hard way. Mr. Speaker, I don't need an explanation. The fact of the matter is, they have been living there for years. Well, why don't you just tell them don't pay tax then?
That's right, move on. They're not citizens.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I just want to tackle very, very briefly the whole issue, well, the issue of sport. You look at the facilities, sport facilities in this country, Mr. Speaker.
I remember you have 3 minutes.
We still want to know where is the national stadium. The people of this country, they at least have been promised prior to 2001 a national stadium. The beginning and now is the end of your life, your political life that is. Still no stadium. Where is it much promised and taunted, talked about indoor sport facility? Where is that? Why are we depriving our athletes of top-class facilities, Mr. Speaker? We are talking about sports against crime, but the way this government has neglected the athletes and the facilities in this country, Mr. Speaker, it is an absolute criminal act. It is a crime against sports, Mr. Speaker. Not sports against crime, it is a crime against sports. Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm surprised the person that knows everything didn't know that one. Mr. Speaker, just touching very briefly, because of the limited time that I have. We heard about agriculture, and I want to talk just about the marijuana part. Mr. Speaker, and I want our people to understand that there's a growing market worldwide, not just for medical cannabis. I'm going to borrow this one from you, Honorable Member of North Leeward, Brother Patel. Europe, a staggering population, consumers of over 700 million people who are in need and actively either using or having a demand for not just medical cannabis. And I hate to talk, well, you need to step up with the time. Mr. Speaker, you're not up to date, Mr. Prime Minister. The thing is, over 700 people not just want the medical cannabis, 700 million, thank you. But the thing is, Mr. Speaker, it was amazing to see that the amount of people that were desiring recreational marijuana and the amount of money that can be attained from that surpass that of the revenue that you can get from medical marijuana. But I know Brother Patel would deal with that. The point I'm simply making here, Mr. Speaker, why is it that this government does not want our people, our traditional farmers, to benefit from recreational marijuana? Why is it? That is what I want our people to understand.
You're running against time, so you have to bring this all to an end.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want the people who are sitting on the blocks in Camden Park, in Bottom Kittels, in Clare Valley to understand this. Those of you who lie in by Lasham Shop, I know you're listening to me too. Yes, those guys by Skull. Top Kittels, that is my tough. That is NDP country, boy. Mr. Speaker, those guys by Rasta, down in Clare Valley, Relland Hill. Those of you who are listening from Maf Shop there. And I go over to what will no longer be from henceforth, Peniston, that was ULP country. But I'm telling you now, it is no longer ULP territory. Those people are smart because they recognize that this is a government that is intent on keeping them in poverty. And now that they have an opportunity to earn some money after the same government would have oppressed them so much, prosecuted them, sanctioned or let go
I don't remember, you know,
the police officers and them.
You're now continuing illegally.
Well, Mr. Speaker, you know, marijuana was illegal, but some parts of it is now legal. But you know, Mr. Speaker, the final thing that I want to say here, we were in this house debating the medical cannabis bill. And all that we're talking about, you know, amnesty that would be provided and how the police would use the discretion and be lenient to the people. Our words from the parliament did not even settle properly, but police were in South Leeward wiling up people for weed, marijuana. And there's a constituent of mine, a young lady, who was arrested and who is missing money. Who is missing money, Mr. Speaker? Because the people who came to conduct that search, according to her, rip her off. I am sending a note. I'm informing you St. Vincent and the Grenadines. There will be more of this for as long as the Unity Labour Party remains in office.